Out of the 50+ movies you've directed and produced, which was the hardest to find financing for?
Well, I would definitely have to say the first one, She's Gonna Have It, which cost $175,000, because that was my debut film as far as a feature film, as feature films go. And people think that I did that film right after film school. There was a 4-year period between me finishing NYU and She's Gonna Have It coming out. So it was not like that. And then another one would be Malcolm X. We ran out of money and I had to go get some money too.
Does it ever get easier?
What's easy? What's easy? I mean, if it was easy, you know, I wouldn't have launched a Kickstarter campaign. We're in day 5. So this is tough business, you know. And I really, and E can tell you, he's one of my students, and every time I'm here in LA, he helps me. But I do not try to sugarcoat things all to my students. And it would be a great disservice to them if I did that. So I let them know, you know, this is no guarantee it's going to happen for you.
So for my first film, 10 Miles Per Hour, we financed it in large part with credit cards. Both Josh and I said, we can't find any sponsors, we don't know where the money's at. Put a lot of work into that, put a lot of energy into trying to get, you know, other people to help fund the film, and really blanked out. So we just took our credit cards and financed it, and we got to a point in the process where we needed to tap into a little bit of our retirement savings, which was nice that I had that available, because I know, you know, some people don't, and it's interesting because people are always so afraid to spend their retirement, but I found it really a freeing activity. Like, ultimately it's been a great way to use that investment to ultimately further my life and my experiences, which I think should be the right thing. So that was 10 Miles Per Hour. It was tough. We took a lot of our own, you know, money and just dumped it in and said, we've got to get this thing done, and we've got to make it and put it out to the market. Eventually, over the course of time with 10 Miles Per Hour, the money that we did, the hard cash that we actually spent on our credit cards and retirement was returned to us. So that was cool. All the sweat, I'd say, probably never totally got paid back. But it's nice to know that the film is still generating some revenue almost, you know, 8 years or so after its release. So it's pretty cool.
Well, the first time was pieced together. You know, I was from the community from Alton, you know, little bits and pieces here and there. And then I teamed up with a production company in Los Angeles, and they came on board as co-financers. And that happened over about a year and a half. That was unique in that sense. It took a long time, but you know, that really fell into, you know, many different resources. I think at the end of the day we had like 22 people who had equity in the movie.
Did you invest your own money with the puffy chair and Baghead?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
So you showed, you know, people that you had your own skin in the game.
Yeah.
Do you think that's important for a lot of people? Because so many people, they say, oh, use other people's money, don't use your own. But don't you think in the beginning that's probably the best way to prove that you're willing to invest in yourself and take a risk?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to invest your own money into whatever projects that you're doing, you know. That's something that I've always done and that I believe in. And I would never be a part of a project that I wouldn't be willing to invest in as well. But I do think, especially in the beginning, it greenlights your projects and it makes them go faster, you know, and it allows you to explore, and it gives you the freedom to be yourself and to take more chances, you know. So because I think the most difficult thing about making a piece of art is really like figuring out what you're trying to express and to do it in a truthful manner. And if you have a lot of voices in the room before you really know who you are, it might be hard to figure that out.
Because we're hurt, you know, we feel like, oh, they don't believe in us.
I don't think you can afford to be hurt. Your personal feelings have got to be left on the doorstep somewhere else. You are in a very, very difficult and dynamic situation when you're fundraising, and there really is no room for personal feelings of hurt or rejection. That, you got to just get rid of that. It's not useful to you in any way. This is just a job you're doing, and you won't be successful at every phase of it, but overall you will be successful, and that's what you look for.
And that same notion would apply as well to actually just being in the business, whether you're an actor, filmmaker, composer, what have you, right?
Yes, it is not an easy business.
And if you develop, someone, I forget where I read this, said to develop rhino skin, where just stuff just doesn't affect you anymore. Was that something that you were able to do over a course of time, or were you always pretty thick-skinned?
No, I was not thick-skinned. I was your typical fragile young girl who was easily hurt. But, you know, you learn. You get out there and you tough it out and you learn, and that's what you do. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and say, hey, you know, that doesn't bother me anymore. I don't care. Who are they? You know, you're who you are, and that's what you're searching for all the time. And once you find that, once you find your own personal strength, nobody can shake that. I have a little sign that I put on my computer that another producer said. I found it in, I don't know, some magazine. It said, if anyone says no to you and you're discouraged for 1 second, you're dead. Okay. Meaning I cannot indulge myself in any kind of self-pity whatsoever. I got too many other people to talk to who are going to say yes. That has been a real help for me.
I don't know, low budgets, compel. I don't know. I think now's a good time to be a filmmaker. You know, technology's helping. You can keep the budgets low and get your films made, and you know, so that's good. But I think what's good about the current media environment, you really can make a film and see if it's what you're meant to be doing. You know, I always felt really comfortable making films. That's how I think. That's what I think about. That's who I am, you know. But writing a novel would be tougher for me. It's not my mentality, you know. So some people, I think they want to make films. They make one and realize, you know, maybe that's not my medium. So it's just finding your right medium. I was lucky to fairly early on hit on it. And that's just the terms I think in. But, you know, the industry changes a lot, but the core mission of most filmmakers who just tell stories that are meaningful to them, that never changes, you know.
I bet all the money I have most of the time. If the film doesn't do, I start from scratch again. I've done it a couple of times. I don't enjoy it very much.
And you're able to sleep at night?
Oh, yes.
Because, okay.
Because to begin with, I never had this money. Everything else was bonus. So I can't complain.
We kind of jumped out there on our own credit cards. We didn't have funding in place and everything. And the first time I saw a little clip that Ramona put together, I said, we have to do this. And she's like, well, they're on tour right now. And I said, right now? We were standing in a Starbucks parking lot. She said, yeah. I said, we're missing the story. It's unfolding. Like, we have to go now. And she was like, well, we don't have money. And I said, well, we can't let that stop us. Don't let that stop us. So within a week of that conversation, we were on the road, just like putting stuff on credit cards. And we just always knew. And there was one moment, you know, because we were so small and we didn't have a lot of money, there was only 5 of us on a road. So there's 2 camera operators, 1 sound, Ramona, and myself. And my job was always sort of to PA and, you know, to drive and just dump footage and just do kind of all the things, anything else that, you know, needed to be done. And I remember at one point, we were probably like maybe at the 6th venue, and I was sitting back there and it kind of dawned on me. I said, we're like charging up a storm. We're following a rock band. We don't have any money. We don't know what the movie is. We don't know anything. We're just out here. And I watched like 10 minutes of Arnell in the dressing room, and he captivated me. I couldn't take my eyes off of him, and that's when I knew. I was like, we're going to be all right. Like, I knew we're going to be all right.
Spike, what are your general rules for raising money for films? I mean, what do you advise your NYU students when the subject comes up? What kind of guidance do you provide them?
Well, I've been teaching at NYU for the past 15 years, and the issue is whether you're in film school or not film school, where you get the money to shoot, where you get the money for completion, to finish your film. And I tell people you just have to be inventive, and you gotta look under every nook and cranny to get it done. There's nothing I could tell somebody that's gonna be like the golden trail and you're gonna find a pot of gold, you know, at the end. That's just not the way this industry works.
So there's no set roadmap, but I'm wondering, is there a certain mindset? Are there certain characteristics, whether they're temperament, whatever, that you tell someone?
Well, I think that when you're looking for money, you have to have, you have to be tough as nails and not be deterred by no's. All it takes is that one person, that one grant, that one scholarship. You know, money can show up, can fall out of the sky sometimes. I mean, that's not something that you have to wait for. One of my own most favorite quotes is by Brooklyn Dodger owner Branch Rickey, who signed Jackie Robinson. And the quote is this: "Luck is a residue of design." So, if you're working and busting your ass, you have a better chance of luck smiling down upon you. But if you're just chilling and not extending any not extending any energy, don't get it from go. We're not seeing that elbow grease. We're not seeing initiative. We're not seeing that blood, sweat, and tears. Very rarely will you find yourself in a lucky situation.
Speaking of which...
But you can't depend on luck, though. You can't depend on luck. I've been very lucky. To be honest, when I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, there was only one African-American director working in Hollywood. His name was Michael Schultz, directed one of my favorite films, Cooley High. And so when I would tell my African-American friends, you know, they're like, do black people, they let black people direct films? And so I never ever thought about the odds. A lot of times you think about stuff like that, it could be a self-inflicted paralysis. But I knew I wanted to do. And I was committed that through hard work, God willing, something will break my way, and it happened.
Jay, how has financing your earlier films evolved into how you find money now? Has it gotten easier? Is it still the same animal? It's just a different, I don't know, I'm probably not explaining it correctly, but is it easier now, or it's just a different way, it's still difficult?
I think financing is always difficult. You know, whether you're raising the money, whether you're paying for it yourself, that adds difficulties that are hard to explain. The pressures of that are enormous. Whether it's going to a studio and getting money. If a studio gives you a lot of money, trust me, you will feel it when you're making that film. So I think it's always hard, and it's always a great responsibility, and it's something that I, just because of my personality, never take lightly, so it's always like with me. But that's why I think it's just important to whoever you're collaborating with, whether it's, you know, actors, studio people, investors, whatever it may be, you have to meet minds with them and feel that connection so that everyone's on the same page trying to make the same thing. And that's, I mean, it's interesting, it's kind of a metaphor for the theme of the movie is like, you know, creating family and creating that special nest to do to do the bold and courageous things that you want to do in your life.
And there was one moment, one seminal moment, and again, that was a film that had been shopped all over town. Every company, independent, medium, big studio, all passed on it. I wasn't involved at the time. The agent shopped it. The writer I had produced before, I actually got to produce his first film. And he came to me and said, would you read this? And I fell in love with it. And then I learned it had been passed on. And I found there was one company, and only one company, that hadn't seen it. And that was Lakeshore, wonderful company. So I said, you know what, I will invest time in this, and I will take it to Lakeshore. And I knew that was it. There was literally one buyer in the whole world I could sell this to. So I went to them and they read it, 3 executives, and they called me the following Monday morning, typical Monday morning call, right? Brilliant story, we loved the craft, it was intriguing, based on a true story, oh my God, fascinating, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful responses from all of them. At which point one of them said, so thanks so much for sending it over, it's going to be a pass. Only in Hollywood. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm sorry, did you just say it's going to be a pass? All this laudatory language, and then you're dead. And there was a long pause because I knew this was it. This was the last man standing. There was no other option. And that was the company, I mentioned this earlier, that was the company, the moment when I said, I respectfully pass on your pass. And there was some nervous laughter. I said, look, of course you can pass, but based on our relationship and our respect for one another, I would ask that before you make a final decision, let me just come in and talk to you. So I went to this meeting. I told these 3 executives the story of my relationship with my dad. Why? Because the script, when I read it initially, was so moving to me because the character played by Richard Gere is so lost in grief after his beloved young wife dies. And a lot of what the texture of it was reminiscent to me of what I felt after my dad's death. He was my best friend. And to me, this film was a great film in its own right. It deserved to get made, and more importantly, it would be a private homage to my dad. And so I cared deeply about it. So I went into this meeting with 3 people who'd read it and said nice things about it, but passed on it. And so I felt the door was open just a little bit. And I never referenced the script, I never talked about the title, I just simply told them the story of my dad. I told them who my dad was. I told them about our friendship and our relationship and the love that we had, and what it was like when, unexpectedly, never having been sick, he just passed away, and what that was to my family and to me. And I just spent, not long, 12 minutes, 10 minutes telling them this story, at the end of which I simply said, I cannot imagine anyone, filmmaker, actor, audience, doesn't matter, who will not be moved. We're wired, whether we lost someone or not, we're wired to understand the tragedy and despair of losing someone so close to you. And they huddled and they changed their mind. Bottom line, they changed their mind. And we got to make this film. And it's a great film. It wasn't as big as Pretty Woman, but it was well received and actually become more popular over the years. And I'm very proud of the film, but in a way, as a learning lesson, it's like, you know, we talked earlier about never take no for an answer. And I think what I came away from that was, if you are, you know, if you're ballsy enough, if you're bold and courageous enough, just to, it's like, get naked in public. If you're willing to get naked in public, people are impressed, right? Because we all know about vibration and frequency, and if you're like, you know, when you're deeply moved and you're in that very deeply authentic place, and there's no BS, we know it, it's real. That's very attractive to us, and that's what we want to put on a big screen, and that's what they got. They got why this is going to move the audience and therefore potentially be a success. And the film was successful as a business matter, but that's not, you know, I don't measure it in those terms. I just think, how do I get a yes from these people so I can do what I so desperately want to do as a creative person? And the only thing I could do is tell the truth. And it worked.
And so the executive producer of the film came on board, and he's known from A&E's Flip This House, and that's Armando Montalongo.
Yeah. Armando Montalongo, I had not met. I didn't even really know about him because Brian never really spoke to me about him. He kind of said it vaguely initially when we were packaging this together. He said, "Oh, I work for this guy who's really successful in real estate," and that was about the extent of my knowledge of Armando Montalongo when I was packaging this together, because Brian had come out to Hollywood, and together we were sort of taking meetings with a lot of production houses and studios trying to sell this story. I put a package together, business plan, budget, all that stuff. And when we went to these meetings, it was very difficult because Brian, stutters a little bit, and I think a lot of people thought that he was always nervous in the meetings. And they were like, calm down, and he wasn't nervous, he just has a slight stutter sometimes, you know, and obviously if he's nervous, it gets worse. But so a lot of the meetings had these hiccups because they all thought that he was nervous, and being the director, you know, or pursuing the first-time director of his project that he wrote, that made investors a little hesitant of like, this guy's not confident enough to direct. And he's extremely confident, but he had this one, you know, physical trait that kind of perceived him differently. And also there was the aspect of where every person that we met with would say, well, because in our business plan, all the leads that we had already, Walter Perez, Jeremy Ray Valdez, myself, and Fernando Romero attached. So we had them in the business plan, and they're all Latino. So when any investor looked at that business plan, they didn't really see any white faces, familiar faces. They just saw a lot of brown faces. And that was another reason why they were very hesitant, because they were like, can't you make one of them Latino and maybe the other three? You know, like, leave the girl as Latina and maybe the three guys are all non-Latino. And that happened a lot. So we just kept going, and it was very heartbreaking because, you know, Brian was out here. He has his own family, his 2 kids and a wife back in San Antonio, so he was apart from them. And he was out here, and he kept hearing this, you know, constant, like, change your characters. Maybe we need another director because you don't seem like you're, you know, confident enough person to direct this film. So those were the obstacles that we faced.
Going back to that theoretical dinner, let's suppose the buffer, the social buffer's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's the filmmaker and the one with the checkbook.
Right.
What should that filmmaker do with good intention, with integrity, to make sure that they know, this person with the cash knows that they may never see it again?
Well, I think you have a moral obligation to make sure it's not the rent money or the mortgage money. You know, like, you don't want to be stealing. You're not stealing money from little old ladies that they can't, you know, buy groceries. Make sure someone who has. I mean, that's always easy to suss out. Is make sure this is fun money for them, and they're not going to see it for a while. But I don't know. You necessarily need to bring that up. If they bring it up, of course, you say, hey, absolutely. But you always have an investment packet where you have all the information, and you kind of have that disclaimer in there and saying, you know what, there are better investments than indie film. If you want to, you know, if you want to really invest your money well, put it in commercial real estate or invest in one ingredient in Xanax. You know, there was a company called Galt. It was the largest private investment group in the world. Still may be the largest private, I don't know. But they fell in love with filmmaking for a while because they owned, again, like one ingredient in like these major subscription or prescriptions. So they, every time someone bought Xanax or whatever it was, or you know, Valium
or something, yeah,
whatever, they would make a penny, and there were bazillions of them. So they were just making hand over fist money, billions of dollars were coming in, and they found that they went to parties or bars and they say, yeah, I own 1% of Xanax. People go, oh, whatever, you know, I own pharmaceutical ingredients. Well, who cares? Then they decided to get into filmmaking, into into distribution actually. They opened up a label just because they felt it was a passive business. They could just pick up a movie for nothing and spit it out, blah, blah, blah. But then they started going to parties and saying, yeah, I distribute movies. You distribute movies? Wow. And that became a much more attractive thing. So they kind of fell in love with it simply for that reason. I think it's what you always go back to is when they say, well, you know, I'll make sure I get a return on my investment. You say, well, unfortunately, when you're investing in the arts, the financial investment can take time to happen, or may never happen, or may be partial. You know, you can make the terms as favorable as you want in the deal. You know, we have it so that you get 120% of your investment back before we see a dime. But you always say, is that really why you're investing? You know, bring it back to the fun. Bring it back to the fact that this is going to be an adventure. You get to go on set. You get to hang out at parties. You go to film festivals and all these things, and you get to be part of the fun. We have an exec producer on Favor who put in some money, and she knew she wasn't going to get it back, or it would be a long time. But she loved the script, and she loved Patrick, and she's been a huge advocate for us still and involved. She's gotten very involved in the film, and she came down to the Q&As, and she started putting money into other films because she really just likes the dream. She's like, I'd rather be a patron of the arts and help get these films made and go see these things in front of audiences and just enjoy enabling artists than worrying about whether I get a return on my few $1,000s. It's not investing big sums of money, but I mean it's definitely helpful.
Sure.
So.
What were some of the notes you received from the different investors that you went to? Did they want you to change it? Oh, can you make her 30 years old instead of 40? I mean, like, what were some of the things they said to you?
I don't care to talk about that. I think everybody sure has a valid thing, but until I have my own reasons, and I don't like when people give you notes without asking you why. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like, oh, I don't like that, and you think, well, I could tell you why that was the reason, and then we can really have a discussion about it. So I think some people are better at giving notes. Some people are absolutely no. There are kind of maybes. There's a lot of waiting around for people to read scripts and stuff like that. So you have to, I say, pick a group of people, maybe 5, that you really trust, who really know you. Some of them can be in the film industry. Some of them, hopefully one's like a dentist or somebody who works out of the industry or something, to get the full spectrum of like notes, like I don't understand this, why does this happen? And so I instead of like people are nice, they ask, can I read your script? And you get all excited about it because it feels validating, and then but then you've subjected yourself to 49 opinions where you don't need 49 opinions, you need 5. So it's all about collaboration. I'm all about collaboration and stuff, but I think it's you have to be smart, and also my advice would be very, very, very sure about your script before you send it out, because you really only get one chance and that kind of thing, unless you're like me and rewrote your script. But so you just have to have patience. You have to have real conviction.
Like I know these filmmakers out of New York, and they make a film every couple of years, and they made one on 16. They raised a lot of money, and they made one on Super 16 a few years ago. They made the next one for like 40 grand. They wanted to make another one. They didn't have access to money. They hadn't gotten money from this yet. They hadn't gotten money from this yet. They were in a place where they didn't have money. They didn't want to crowdfund. So they found a way to make a film for $1,000. They made shot on a 5D, and one of them acted in it as the lead, and they got another actor they knew in New York to play the other lead. And they went back to their hometown, and they shot in their parents' restaurant. Their parents played her parents and these people that they knew. And they shot the crew of like a very small crew with lavaliers and a little mic pack, and crew of 2, and they shot this thing for under $1,000. And it's a really good movie. I mean, it's a really well done movie. It's a very well acted film. They knew exactly where to bring in real actors and where to let people be themselves, using these locations that they could control. And they took the time, and they shot on, again, they used labs, used a zoom and a 5D, and the film looks and sounds great. It's a really good movie for $1,000. So I think you find a way to do it. It's really how it works. Maybe their next film they'll crowdfund, maybe their next film they'll do this. But you kind of have to, unless you have a reliable source of revenue or you have a trust fund, you really have to kind of alternate how you raise money for movies, and you have to kind of pick the right way of raising money for that film, or pick the film based on the money you have access to at that time.
Kevin, we know that crowdfunding is all the rage with Kickstarter and Indiegogo and other sites that are wonderful. But what if someone does not want to crowdfund? It's not as easy as just posting the campaign. There's a lot of work. It's like a full-time job. Can you talk about other ways of funding, grants, what have you?
Well, I've been lucky to find private money to fund my documentaries, but there are more traditional sources, and that's generally teaming up with either a production company or a network. You know, it's a traditional way. You go and you pitch a network, HBO, what have you, and they're going to go into business with you. That's ideally the way you do things. That's not easy either. So these other avenues have come along. Grants I've never done because you need the patience of Job to do that. That takes forever, and the money's coming in very small amounts. It's possible. I have a good friend doing a documentary now on WC Handy, and she received money, grant money, and so she's been filming as she goes along. So it is possible. The crowdfunding is also difficult. I've had 3 friends who have successfully funded at various price points, up from $35,000 up to $200,000. And that's very rare, but it's doable on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And then there's private individuals. That's another form that I found. That's also difficult, but it does cut through a lot of the back and forth with grants or networks or what have you. So that's always the number one question, and the toughest thing is how do you get the money to make these things. So it's really going out to the marketplace and finding out they're going to say, well, what's in it for them? Can they make money off this enterprise? Are they going to be able to see the return on their dollar, on their investment? So that's why you consider these things when you're picking your topics. You want to look at the marketplace and say, is there room in the market for this documentary? Has there been competition on this subject? If so, is there room for one more? If not, was there a reason nobody wanted to do this topic? So you're going to look at all of that, as you go into funding. But it's always the most difficult thing. There are new ways to do it. I wouldn't say no to the crowdsourcing, because if you have a good pitch and you have a good idea, and you maybe only need funds to either get started or to finish, maybe $35,000 or $50,000, that's pretty doable. I had some friends who needed finishing funds of $200, and they raised $210 or so. So it is possible to do if you have an appealing subject.
Did you entertain crowdfunding for part of the budget?
I thought about it. I feel to successful. I really believe in crowdfunding in a lot of ways. I feel for it to be most successful, you need to have the support of everyone involved. And for me, David's been beyond supportive, overwhelmingly supportive of the project. But he wasn't a producer on the film. He would say this too. He wasn't interested in the process. He wanted to let me go make it. And I sort of felt to run a successful crowdsourcing campaign for it, it would have needed his involvement, because I felt it would have been sort of disingenuous to be the way to run a successful campaign would have been like, hey, Sedaris fans, do you want to see a Sedaris movie? And it would have I didn't feel comfortable asking him. Maybe he would have helped me and done a video, I'm not sure, but it felt wrong to ask him, for me, and I felt without his support it felt sort of wrong to run a campaign for it. Now that there's a finished film, we've closed distribution, but if I was doing a self-distribution, I would consider it now that there's a finished film, and now that I have interviews with David and elements I can use with his permission, of course, but I feel like it's each project's its own, and some projects are meant to be crowdfunded, and this one just wasn't one of them. I didn't feel like I could engage the community in the right way, and also we had some actors attached, but they ended up not being the actors in the final film, and I felt like we would have needed to utilize them, but I felt uncomfortable with that because I didn't have a working relationship with them yet, and they were, slightly bigger names than what ended up in the movie, just by the nature of whoever. At the time I cast them, they weren't bigger names, and they got bigger names and got too busy to be in the film, and I ended up with a cast I could have only dreamed of having anyway, so I'm thrilled about that, but it felt strange to bring them involved. It just didn't feel like I could do it the right way. And I feel like when I look at the really successful crowd campaigns, sure, there's some outliers that go into the $300,000 and $400,000, but I really feel like the most ambitious you really should get, is to expect is at the most, 100. I feel like even the Canyons, I think they ended up going to 130, but you have Paul Schrader and Bret Easton Ellis, who each have massive, loyal, decades-long fan bases. And even then, they pushed a lot on that campaign, and they hit, which is an incredible amount of money, but that still wasn't enough for me to make the film. So I also felt uncomfortable going out there and being like, give me $100,000 and maybe I'll be able to find the other however much we need. It just felt wrong for this project, but I hope I can do something one day that I can make cheaply enough. You know, this movie had to be shot on location. It had 30 speaking parts. It had, you know, a different location every day, all exteriors. It just had things that naturally made it expensive. But I hope to do something. If I did something small, if I did a movie I could shoot on my own and with minimal crew and minimal locations, and here in Los Angeles, I would totally consider doing crowdsourcing that way.
It was, I think, 2010 we tried Indiegogo because that kind of fundraising had just become popular, and we tried every other kind, so we thought, well, why not Indiegogo? So we went and did an Indiegogo campaign, and we asked for $15,000, and we got it. But I gotta tell you, that was hard money to raise. I think everybody has this notion that you go on Indiegogo and there's hundreds of people out there who want to fund films, and no, mostly it's your friends and their friends, and it's intense work. And then you have to give gifts to everybody, you know, everybody does it for perks, and so it's very intensive. So.
Did it almost feel like a full-time job?
It was a full-time job.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, the Indiegogo campaign took us 3 months to fulfill everything and to, you know, to raise all the money and then fulfill all the obligations that we had promised. We had promised people T-shirts and posters and things like that, and then we had to mail all that out. It was very intensive.
So do you remember what you did on a daily basis during the actual live campaign? Was it again more emails to people and sharing the link?
Emails, phone calls. I had a lot of lunches. I met with a lot of people who were interested but wanted to kind of have a personal contact. It's a very personal business, fundraising for something like this. And you never know who's going to lead you to somebody else, you know. You have drinks with somebody and you think they're going to give you $10,000 and they never come through with anything, and then 3 months later they send a friend your way who gives you $10,000. So it's not a direct science, that's for sure.
What would you recommend to another filmmaker who's considering launching a crowdfunding campaign and has a beautiful project, but maybe they don't have the contacts? Maybe they don't know that many people, or some of the people that they know aren't able to give. How would you advise them to gauge what their audience is?
You know, that's a question that I really don't have an answer for. My experience with Indiegogo was very personal to me, and I know that the people who gave on Indiegogo were all somehow personally linked to me. I think there's a bit of a fantasy out there right now that you can just go on to Kickstarter or Indiegogo and put your project up there and people will come seeking you. But I don't think that really happens. I think it's really a dirty, down in the dirt, hard struggle. If somebody knows different than me, I'd like to hear from them. But that's the way I perceive it.
Would you advise someone who's maybe failed at crowdfunding to kind of dust themselves off and regroup and try again? Because so many people, I think they become, and understandably, you're hurt, you're upset, hey, my campaign failed, and then you shy away from it. Would you advise people to just get back on the horse and try it again and give it some time?
Well, I think any pursuit that you do in life is filled with failures and successes, and you often learn more from your failures than your success. So, you know, of course you have to pick yourself up. What else? You're going to lie in the dirt the rest of your life? It's not an option.
Judy, your experience with crowdfunding was back in 2010 when it was still sort of a novelty. Your thoughts now that it's passed, you were successful, you raised, what, $15,000. What's your thoughts on it now that it's passed?
Well, the time it took, the intensity of it, I had 3 people working on it for 3 months. The $15,000 probably just barely paid our salary during those months, or their salaries, because I didn't take a salary. It paid their salaries during those months and left some money for us to stay operating. I think now, looking back on it, because it might have been fairly new at that time and people weren't familiar with it, we were educating our fan base as to what it was. I think my time might have been better used just going knocking on doors the way I had been doing, and I probably could have raised at least that much. Maybe today it's different. Maybe people know more about what these crowdfunding sources are and are more willing. But then I felt I could have used my time better, frankly.
Walter is a very low budget film, a lot of sweat for both my wife and I. It was kind of a collaborative project where we came together as we were getting married and made this film. And so we had some investment, about $35,000 in investment to make the film. We used that cash and then raised $25,000 for its release, and put a lot of sweat and got some friends to help us out. So we've got our creative partner strategy. And we're now releasing it with not too much debt. We have some investment, but that's part of it kind of balances out with the creative partners as well. So, I mean, we hope that by next year, or early next year, depending on how fast we push the release, because we've been thinking about kind of taking time, but we hope that film is paying everybody back, soon. So it seems to be working, but it's, and keep in mind that Walter actually started before Where the Yellowstone Goes, so it kind of fits in there, and ultimately Where the Yellowstone Goes has led to another film, a whole river series, and one of the sponsors that was involved with that doubled their commitment to the next film and intends to do a series of more river films with us. So we're doing sort of the same sort of strategy where we keep a documentary that is essentially low cash budget, high sweat budget, and in the end has a quicker payout for the people that are involved, that are committed and take the chance.
Cool. If you could put in a capsule what enabled you to raise $125,000 on Kickstarter, what would be the most important factors?
Audience building. I never would have launched a campaign for 6 figures if I hadn't spent 2 years building an online audience with a website. So, it's one of those 10 years to an overnight success kind of thing where all of the work you've put in the back, you hope, helps you do this thing that was the most ambitious thing I'd ever done in my life as far as, a Kickstarter campaign is all or nothing. And when you hit launch and it says $115,000 and it says $0 and 0 cents, from here to there is a long way to go. But I felt like I had done everything in my power over the last couple of years to build a website, and I felt like enough people knew who I was and that it was a strong enough project with some external validation from IFP and from Lincoln Center, that it was, I felt like if I failed, that I would have done everything I possibly could, and then I wouldn't feel bad about it. So, the main thing was building an audience, and the way that I went about it is different than a lot of people will, as far as, I was talking about the craft of filmmaking and the behind the scenes stuff, as opposed to just this one particular project. But ultimately, I think it comes down to that approach of saying, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, these things aren't magic. You can make a great video, but ultimately you have to have a feeling of you've been working on this for a long time and people know who you are and are invested in your success. So it's not, I think the Kickstarter campaigns that don't succeed a lot of the times are ones where people, saw somebody else doing this and thought, oh, well, I can do that too. And they didn't really understand the amount of work that the other people did, the successful campaigns did, not only during their campaign, but before it, when a lot of that work happens.
What are your thoughts on credit cards?
I think investing in, I think like
Suppose you have one that has no APR for like a year and you're like, you know what, I'm pretty sure I can pay this off rapidly if I just put all this on it really quickly and it'll be no problem.
I think working on credit cards is I'm not going to advise that because that's really scary. That said, if I had a credit card that had no interest for a year and I knew I could make that money back in a year with a reasonable amount of certainty, I might not do that. but I think it's always better to go with positive cash. I have done this. I have closed an IRA to fund a part of a film. I have done that. So it's like saying, the whole thing is you miss all the shots you don't take. Well, you also don't have all the films you don't make. Like, how long are you going to be dead? Like, here's your death. Here's forever. Well, I died with all this money. Yeah, but you could have made another film. Those films are made over here. They're not made here. So, and I think, as I get older, and it takes me 3 or 4 years to make a movie, I get very aware of time. How many more films do I have before I'm too old to lift the camera, or before I get mocked?
John, should independent filmmakers finance their film with credit cards?
No. I mean, I usually don't say a blanket no to anything, because, hey, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, Well, not that cats should be skinned, but, but I don't think it's a good idea, especially these days, to really go into usury-oriented debt, which is what credit card debt is. Many credit cards are 20% interest, and that's really a burden. However, I also do feel that most creative projects need to start somehow. And, Francis Ford Coppola once said, and I took this to heart, that no one else is going to jump into your project unless you show your own commitment and putting your own money in. And many artists don't have their own money outside of credit cards. So, I think that it's not terrible for a project to get started in that way, but I would recommend highly that filmmakers don't get too burdened with debt so that it really impacts their lives in a deleterious fashion. And I think now there are so many possibilities to be creative and engage audiences that don't involve a lot of capital, that weren't possible 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, that, there isn't as much of a need for people to go into credit card debt to make a piece of work.
Right, well, I've heard of documentarians putting, let's say, plane tickets overseas to get the main, subject of their film on credit cards, and then going from there and finding investors. But I mean, what if someone doesn't have the audience to go and crowdfund for it? So that's out the window. So you're saying just a small portion to sort of show that you have some skin in the game, but then find alternative ways.
And I don't want to advise anyone one way or another in terms of credit cards, because the first thing I'll say is that it is a problematic way of financing a project, because of, the exorbitant interest that's charged, and it's kind of a hard hole to get out of. So, barring that, I think at some points you do have to float certain aspects of a project, and credit cards are certainly one way of doing it these days. But I do feel like, if you don't have an audience to crowdfund, I think what you need to start thinking about, and would be healthy for your whole project, is to start thinking about how you can create that audience, and to, spend some time simultaneously engaging that audience in addition to making the work. And the thing is that, and again, I was just talking to a filmmaker yesterday, if you have a continuity to your work so that it makes sense for you to bring your audience along in your creative process throughout your career, any work that you invest in audience development now is going to pay off later. So, you got to start somewhere, and, the sooner the better. Like, start with a small crowdfund campaign, amongst whatever network that you have, and then a year later do another one. It's like you can't go back to the well too often, but so long as you're growing as an artist and the project is developing, I think there's room for that.
Every feature film that I've done has gotten financed differently because it's what you do when you get there. It's sort of like, there's no plan. If I was independently wealthy or had some sort of, whatever, there's no plan. It's what you do at the time. With 10 Till Noon, we raised money through traditional investors. We burned through a lot of favors, and we burned through all our money people. With official rejection, we ended up self-financing the whole movie. It was, but, you know, but a lot of that piggybacked 10 Till Noon. So we were able to do it pretty cheaply. We deferred a lot of money in that film, so you know, we were able to do it that way. With Favor, we crowdfunded it, and that was, you know, the new thing to do, and that worked. So for the next one, I'm not sure what we're going to do. It's kind of like you can't kind of do the same thing twice, you know. I mean,
why? I find it
interesting. With traditional distributors, distributors, we talk about it so much. With traditional investors, you sort of, you know, they're going to lose money, probably. And if they make money, great. But if they do, it's in the long game. So until the film's made money, it's hard to go back to the same person and go, hey, by the way, another 10 grand? What do you think? Another 30 grand? It's very hard to do that because it takes a lot of years for a film to be profitable. So, and, you know, in the rare case you get a hit, but and, you know, and the thing is, we're friendly with them all. It's not like they're like, oh, where's our money? But you know, they're not. You don't want to go back and try to tap them again. You want to go to the next round. So that's why you kind of don't want to do it the same place twice until you can come back with really, really good news. Hey, we finally, you know, have some profit for you. Self-financing is hard because you burn through your money, you know, quickly, and it takes a while for that to build back up. And then with crowdfunding, I think it's the same thing. You go back to that well the second time, especially before the first one's out. I think it's hard. I think you can do it. Gary King's doing his third crowdfunding campaign. I think it's more successful if you do it in small bursts too. I know one guy, this filmmaker named Gorman, who does it. He's always got a campaign going, but they're only like $1,000, $2,000, and he's raised lots of money, but he just keeps feeding, and people kind of keep double dipping, triple dipping because it's so small. That's one way of doing it. But you know, it's like you have to wait. It's like harvesting fruit. You know, you gotta wait for the fruit to grow back. With the new film that we're putting together now, Small Hours, we're trying to go back to traditional investors again, but we're going to try to hit different ones, and we're going to try to go for more money this time. So that's sort of how that works. I think it's really dependent upon the film, the time it's being made, and what you have available to you at that time. You'll find a way. You know, that's the way to go.
Second film, 10 Yards. We were actually, at this point in time, able to start looking at some sponsorships, and we were able to close some sponsorships, but it was pretty limited. I mean, we were talking $15,000 to $20,000, somewhere in that range of cash that we raised, but it took quite a bit of edge off with making the film. By this time, we had some of the camera equipment already. You know, we'd invested some of that early money into sort of building a program. There was also some additional cash that was put in as sort of an investment from an individual, and so that was, again, we were in a place where all of a sudden there was a little bit of money, but we didn't quite have enough money to really round it out, get the film done, and then have enough left over for a launch. So we were, you know, burning all of the cash on production, which is probably the biggest challenge I think filmmakers face. Is we get a little bit of money somehow or another, you know, and we blow it all to make this film. And then you're in this situation where, okay, the film's made, a lot of times people blow it all before they edit it, you know, and then that's a really difficult position to be in. So I think, you know, you really got to think that through and divvy it up and let people know early off that it's going to be a long time before they probably see money. So with 10 Yards, unfortunately, because we were putting all of the money that we received from these sponsorships and this individual, we were putting it all into, you know, making the film and trying to market the film. We ended up spending more money of our own and getting a little bit further into debt. So after that film, I was in a tough place. Couldn't figure out how to make any money off that film. It was just my sophomore slump, and it was a really tough one.
On the second film, it was financed by one person. It was the story he wanted to tell. He was the executive producer, and it's what, you know, it was a vanity project. And I don't mean that in a negative way. He had the money, he wanted to tell the story, and he hired people to do it. And that, you know, and I was one of those people he hired. I didn't have to raise any money, and I got to be creative and everything.
So but moving on to my third film, Ride the Divide. I'm figuring things out. I'm realizing, okay, sponsorships, man, I know I can make these work better by this time. I had 2 examples, and I could sort of paint 10 Yards as a success to the sponsors when we went out to try to get money. So I worked with Mike Dion on this, and we went out and we actually raised quite a bit of sponsorship money, I'd say. I want to say around 50 grand, and then there was, again, private investment put into that film, probably equal amount in private investment. So we actually had a nice chunk of money that was put into that film. As we got closer to release, there was another little bit of investment that came in to finish it up. And so that film was great because we were in a situation where there was always cash, but we were very smart about not overspending cash. And we really, most of that money is going into production, not really paying people. It's going into travel. It's going into, you know, the aspects of post-production where you really need to hire expertise like sound and color correction, and just finishing the film and getting it really solid, and, you know, being able to buy product and things like that so you can sell the film. So we had a great situation where when that film was done, there wasn't too much of that, you know, money to pay back. There was a little bit, I think there was a little bit of debt still, debt/investment that was put into that film. And so we were able to pay that off quickly because the film was really successful and had, you know, was by far my most profitable film so far that I've worked on. And it's, you know, it continues to do really well. And that film released 3 or 4 years ago, I think, about 3.5, and it's still doing really well. So it's pretty cool because it's like we've passed that mark. Now it creates a revenue stream that I try to figure out ways not to use, but you know, inevitably I do at times to make sure I further my career. I keep reinvesting in my films.
The third film, Joint Body, was a similar deal. Only 3 people I did, dealing with the guy that gets out of jail. Again, some Alton equity, and then some equity from the East Coast. And then She Loves Me Not, which is what I just finished, was sort of along the lines of the cover-up. It was financed by one individual, but it was more altruistic in the sense of he was living in this beautiful home that has a lot of history in the community, and he saw it as an opportunity to blend sort of the history of the home from the 20s and show how it's evolved into now. And so he approached me and said, I want to do this film in the house, and are you willing to talk to me about a potential story? So it was much more organic in how that grew, but I was still given guidelines. It's not like I approached him and said, hey, I want to make a movie in this beautiful estate.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that was the writer's home in the film?
Yeah, Carrie Always is home, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to the 4th film, that was Where the Yellowstone Goes, which was made in tandem with another film called Reveal the Path. And I have some ownership in each of those films, so we can kind of talk about both of those together. Essentially, Where the Yellowstone Goes was able to raise about $75,000 in sponsorship money. This is coming from basically corporate brands or a nonprofit, one nonprofit for corporate brands. And they put money into the film because they liked the message that told. We found ways to create some ancillary content and just kind of help, you know, use the film to drive at some of the messages they're trying to communicate and reach the same audience. Then we were also able to raise some crowdfunding money around the time that film was finished and ready for market, which helped it go to market. We took all the money we raised in crowdfunding and put it into pushing the film further out there and getting more screenings set up, which is scary to do because you're like, you work so hard and you're like, oh, all of a sudden we got $32,000 in the bank, and you're like, this is great, it's payday. But we look at it and we're like, it's not. It's almost you keep putting this money in there one way or another. And so that film's also done really well, and it was nice that the minute it went to market, for the most part, I mean, there's a little bit maybe to pay off for like a month or two, but like it was like basically instant money that we were able to give back to the partners and the creators. At the same time, we made Reveal the Path, which it got more investment than sponsorship. It got a little bit of sponsorship, not as much as Where the Yellowstone Goes. I can't say the exact figure, but you know, it's less than $75,000. But it got also quite a bit of infusion of investment. It was a highly intensive, like, travel around the world film where we went to 5 different countries and shot. And so we were dealing with a more expensive film than Where the Yellowstone Goes. And so in the end, that film went to market and had a lot of money to pay back. And we're still at the point where we're paying that film back. So that's just kind of an example of how you got to weigh all these things and be careful. If you can raise some money and really be careful about how you spend that money, and then try to get partners, creative partners on board who will benefit later, you can get to that money coming in quicker.
For Killing Winston Jones, you said that the financing fell through 3 times. What were some of the obstacles you were up against?
Obstacles that writers and producers and everyone is up against on every project. I was in a unique situation with Killing Winston Jones because I developed a relationship with the director. And so I was a part of the entire process. I was a part of pre-production, I was a part of production, I'm a part of post-production now. So I was in a unique situation where I was wearing a lot of different hats. So when Joel and I were developing it, we were constantly working together, so that meant we were going out to producers, we were going out to investors, we were going out to casting agents, we were going out to anyone that would read it that could help us put together a package. So the challenges that happened were that we were attaching people that were good, that were friends of Joel's or just people who liked the script, and we were getting investors that were interested and investors that really wanted to make the film and were willing to option it and put in the time, but because of different reasons, they weren't able to finance it at the end. So, sometimes production companies will have a slate of 3 films that year, and one will go way over budget and another one will get pushed, and there's always different reasons why financing can fall through. So unfortunately for us, that happened on 3 different occasions. I mean, for some films it happens 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, For other films, they get financing and they move forward. The 3rd time when we lost financing, within 48 hours, the producer that we had attached, Taylor Hart is his name, who is an incredible producer, very hungry and driven and getting a lot of projects done now. Within 48 hours of the last time that we had our financing fall through, he found another production company and they brought all the money to the table. So with that, we were able to start pre-production the next day. So we had a terrible weekend thinking the film was once again shut down, and on Monday we were flying out to Savannah, Georgia to shoot the film. So it just, every single time you try to get a film into production or even into pre-production or get the financing, you're going to find obstacles along the way. So the financing falling through was just the very first obstacle.
After we had gotten our initial money, which we got from 2 very wonderful major sources, we had shot most of our footage. And now it was time to start the very expensive post-production aspect of the film. And the money crunch of 2008 hit. And it isn't that everything melted down or dried up, it's just that everybody got scared. And the first thing everybody did was tighten their purse strings. So all the potential people and organizations and foundations that we were writing proposals for and that we were personally contacting and wooing, all just said, sorry, the doors are closed. We're not doing any funding. And that put us on the skids for a while. So we turned to the alternatives, which are small donors, little fundraisers, an Indiegogo campaign, and we just struggled along for a couple years to try to get ourselves back on track and to keep going so that the project wouldn't die. So it was a long and difficult time. And in this past year, things have started coming back, and finally we got the money to do our the major expense of the film, which was our rights, our music rights. And once that happened, we could finish.
When you were writing the script, did you have people in mind? I mean, you have also Peter Bogdanovich with the project. I mean, did you have specific people? Did you know Cheryl was going to be?
Again, because it was so personal, I just had myself and my family in mind. Like I wasn't projecting anyone but them onto it. But that's what's fun about it, is that Believe me, 3 years ago, I did not know that I'd be sitting in a chair next to Cheryl Hines talking about a movie called Cold Turkey, where she plays my mother. Like, you know, that's what's great, is that I just wrote it in a room to shoot on my friggin' iPhone. Like, I didn't care, but people liked the script, and so here we are.
And how did you get it into the appropriate hands? Can you tell us?
A really, really good casting director named Paul Ruddy. Knew all these agents and knew all these managers, knew Larry, not Larry David, Larry yet, Cal. Manager, yeah. And it was all through him. I don't know anyone. I'm some guy in a basement scribbling away about my life, and he just had all these connections, and all these folks came in and read and met, and that was it.
So were there times within that 3 years that it looked like it wasn't going to happen?
Well, it's funny. Oh, of course. I mean, the thing got pushed 17 times and fell apart 18 times and all that. But honestly, it happened pretty quick. I wrote it in early 2011, and we shot in early 2012, and we're sitting here in, mid to late 2013, which is quick for a movie.
Yeah, that is. Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Is it harder to raise $25 million to make a film, or is it harder to raise $1 or $2 million for a smaller film? I mean, are the stakes raised?
I'll tell you what, the answer is easy. It's harder to raise $1 million than $25 million.
Why?
Because there's just this mindset that a film that costs $1 million, there's very little want to see, or very little return of investment in a film that's small.
So it's almost that mindset that kind of you get what you pay for, in terms of, let's say,
I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying there's a prejudice against films under $1 million.
When you were pitching Mission Park with Brian, and you were hearing these no's, and you were hearing that the cast should be changed slightly,
yes,
to have what they thought would be more
non-Latinos.
Non-Latinos, yes. What were the reasons that they were giving you? Why did they think that that would enhance the success?
Well, when we created the business plan, we needed to add projects that were successful to compare them to ours. And there weren't any projects, films, that had a predominantly Latino cast that were successful. There just aren't as many. Desperado may be one, and El Mariachi, but those are like far and few between, and they're different from Mission Park. So when you don't have something to show them that, oh, this is marketable, it's very tough sell. The catch-22 is that no one's casting Latinos. So if you don't put them in these films to give them the opportunity to achieve success, then they never will, and therefore you will never have the projects to compare when you're trying to pitch projects with Latinos. And that was the difficult aspect of it. Now, this last weekend, instructions not included. I mean, you just need to put that on the business plan and say 25% of the Latinos who went to the movies this last weekend helped that film make $10 million in 300 theaters. Now you have it. So we can see that it's coming. It's a wave, it's a tidal wave, and it's coming, and it's full of Latinos.
I'm going to tell a story. Through Bookworm, I met Susan Sontag, and I was having dinner with Michael Silverblatt and Susan Sontag, and at that time I'd had about 25 films fall apart, and she said, "Hasn't this broken your heart?" And it shocked me, because she was right, it had broken my heart. She said, "You must go home and immediately start something that only you love, that only you want to see." And I did. I'm going to revisit that same screenplay now, because I couldn't get it financed. Then I almost did, but it changed my career. It changed my writing, which is what I needed to do. I returned to watching the movies that had drawn me into the world of movies, going back to the source, beginning again. And I think that, and I still do that. You know, I still do that. I watched Rules of the Game again, which is a Jean Renoir film. It's probably among my 2 or 3 favorite films. I've seen it several dozen times. I watched it again in January because I needed that stimulation of returning to what it is that I really love and care about. Because only that, I think, will give you the energy to move forward.
Do you think those prior 25 other projects or so weren't really who you were or what you cared about?
Oh, I think they were.
They were?
They were, but I had run aground. I had, you know, when you lead a creative life, you lose your way from time to time. It happens to everyone. And that was, the Sontag conversation reawakened me at a critical time in my life.
Yeah, it was probably about 3 years. I had an idealism that I would write the script and it'd be a David Sedaris thing, the first and probably only David Sedaris project. And my thing was, so, okay, even though it's a little dark and offbeat, people are going to want to make it. You know, people are going to make this and make it on a higher end indie budget level, you know, like a few million. And it was a little naive on my end to think that, you know, I was putting a lot of restrictions on it. You know, I think when you're going for money, you need to know where are your priorities? For me, my priority wasn't controlling the material, keeping the script the same, and being able to decide on having, you know, the final say on casting. Like, those are the kind of things then that are gonna push investors away. Not to say that if I embraced all those things, anyone would have jumped on board, but ultimately I'm making a movie that was dealing with religious themes of sexuality, you know, stuff that isn't necessarily... every time I see an independent film, I'm like, I don't know how they got it financed. And I mean, I always feel it as a compliment, you know, especially when I see ones made like that. I'm like, how did that happen? I think every single film finds its own way, and usually that way is totally different than the previous way, you know? I mean, it was just a long process of really getting a lot of no's. At one point, I think I calculated it was like, once it got like over like 150 no's or so, I stopped counting. Like, I kept a running chart, and when it was like hit that many of people, like financiers or producers or companies, production companies that had passed on it, then I just like stopped keeping a number tally because it got a little depressing. You know, I feel like I have a thick skin, but I think it's okay for anyone to feel like 150 rejections on the same script is a little, it could be a little mind-numbing, you know, but it was, you know, but it was about, I thought the system would sort of serve me a little better. Like, I thought, well, I made my first film and people saw it and people liked it, and now I've written the script and it's a well-known author and I have agents, and it'll come together in the way it should. And it was kind of wrong for me to feel that way, because ultimately it came together through whatever resources I sort of engaged and build, and so I had support from, you know, Film Independent that I had on my own, that I had built over the years. And I got brought into a program where I met a producer who came on board that brought financing. You know, so it was one of those things that ended up being through my own path. And not to say that as anything negative towards the agency route, but just to say that, like, at no point should you ever just sort of be like, okay, well, now I have reps and they're going to get it all taken care of. Like, no, at the end of the day, you're always responsible for yourself. And I think financing is no different. Just about always staying on top of anyone you know, anyone who might know someone with money, and just always staying persistent on it and keep on pushing because everyone's gonna say no. I mean, I've rarely ever heard of a story where someone was like, I sent the script out, people liked it, we got it made. Like, that maybe happens with genre films, but I don't think it ever happens with a drama or a comedy, or especially not a dark comedy, you know?
How long have you been trying to get this film made in a traditional manner before you went to fund anything?
It goes through so many steps, I think. You know, you have an idea. I wrote a script really fast. I wrote this script really fast, which is actually not this particular script, but it was the original script of how I started. And I wanted to write a comedy, and I thought if I write a comedy, it'll be really easy, and, you know, wrong. So I think there's a question of, it's a big process trying to find money, because everyone who wants to give you money has an opinion about a script, as they should, because they're giving you money. And so there's that, and then, I don't know, people like it, they don't like it. I was living in a different country. I had to come to America. I had to come to Los Angeles to kind of focus on that. So that was like even a year after of trying to kind of have meetings and go back and forth. And I mean, my last film took 4 years to be able to make, and it's not an uncommon story among around filmmakers. So this has been a couple of years, but then I did a really big script change, which I think is way better. It's not a comedy anymore. It's kind of a movie about something. It's got funny parts in it, but it's not a comedy. And so, you know, I was thinking about this too, and I was thinking about how great an effective crowdfunding can be, because sometimes you write a script and 4 years pass and you become a different person in that time, and none of those things really make sense. And then, okay, you could go back and rewrite, but there's something, if you have an idea and you can have the immediacy of making it in that time, it becomes a full thought instead of like this constant broken up where you have to become like, you have to put down your artist hat and you have to put on your producer hat and you have to go in and you have to get money. And like, that's fine, it's all part of the thing, but it's distracting from each other. So once you can never get back on the roll, and so it takes a while. It takes a while. It takes much longer than people think. And you know, in the meantime, like hopefully get some other jobs to pay for your life, and you keep going.
Even, you know, the first day of production, actually, we were working in Savannah, Georgia, as I had mentioned. It's a right-to-work state. We weren't unionized across the board. So, of course, we had SAG. We were ATL unionized, so everything above the line was unionized. We were SAG, but some of our other departments weren't completely unionized. So I don't know exactly which ones they were. I feel like it might have been makeup or hair or costume design. But on the very first day of production, the unions and the Teamsters showed up on set and were picketing. And they told our crew that they would have, that they would be fined $5,000 for working on the film, that they would have their cards revoked, that they wouldn't work in this town again. And although that's not true, because Georgia is a right-to-work state, so technically you can shoot a film that's not entirely unionized. But they did enough damage where half of our crew was scared and they left. And so we lost an entire day. And our production company had to decide if they were going to pay to unionize, which is a six-figure decision, and if they were going to push production forward. And for several hours we thought that we were going to be shutting down completely. But luckily we had a strong production company behind us that paid that difference, and the wages for everyone who was working for us became unionized and increased, and we made the film. So that was just another challenge. And throughout the process of production, there's challenges every single day, and even into post-production. It's a lot of creative people working together. And at the end of the day, it's a business, so you have different mentalities. You have people who want to create the best creative process and product and film, and then you have people that want to make as much money as they possibly can. So even in post-production, we have people seeing differently, on the same project. And we just have to find a middle ground so that we can get it released. And it'll be the challenges that we have finding distribution, getting into the film festivals that we want to get into, and getting into the amount of theaters, and hopefully doing well with the film. So every single corner every single corner and every day is a challenge in getting a film done.
So you began Between Us with, what was it, $25,000, and then you raised an additional $14,000 on Kickstarter. And now, if we understand this correctly, it wasn't until 3 days before the production was over that you had actually had enough financing to pay your cast and crew. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
No worries there.
That's about the right story. But it kind of goes back a few years. We were hoping to make this movie originally in, I think I first got together with Joe in 2006 or 2007. We were hoping to make it in 2008 for $2 or $3 million. That was the goal. Like, aim high with your budget, right? And because you never know, you may get lucky. And, it was kind of in the era of Squid and the Whale, and, indie movies, you could get made for that. It wasn't so crazy. Anyway, and we were getting close to that point. We were getting a great cast, because at that point you're offering some real money. I mean, not real money in the sense that we didn't have it, but it's finance contingent money. But anyway, we were getting it out to good actors, and we were getting a great cast. But then the economy, as you well know, tanked in the fall of 2008, and there was no way you could raise millions or thousands or even hundreds or tens of dollars for any film at any budget level for at least 6 more months or so. So luckily for me, that happened to coincide with, if you remember, it was also during the election campaign of 2008, with a side project that I was doing here in the garage, which was with another filmmaker who was staying here for about 5 months at least, named Eitan Gorlin, another Slamdance guy. And he and I were doing this completely unrelated project. It was about a Washington-based pundit. And originally it was a series of short films, then it was a TV pitch, and then we kind of were incubating this character. His name is Martin Eisenstadt. Online, we gave him a blog and a website, and he and people in the media started to believe he was real. And so there was a lot of press about this at the time, and it kind of culminated with Sarah Palin not knowing that Africa was a country, not knowing it was a continent. She said it was a country. She really did say, but our character took credit for being the source of that story. Anyway, MSNBC had breaking news, but they had egg on their face because he wasn't real, and they were saying he was the source of the story. Anyway, the long story short, New York Times did a big half-page profile of us, and the next day we got a book offer. So when presented from a very prestigious New York publisher for our Strauss Giroux. And so when presented with the option, do you keep not getting paid to not direct a movie, or do you get paid to write a book? One's wife tells you to write the book. And so we did that. Eitan and I wrote this book. We took a complete hiatus off of Between Us. He was trying to get a feature of his made at the time as well. And we wrote the book. We had a great time on the book tour. It was very critically acclaimed. It sold well. It was very successful. We went back to pitching it as a TV show and actually came very close to a deal with Ashton Kutcher's company, who was going to produce it. CBS Studios was behind it. It was going to be on Showtime, and then the deal fell through because one executive got fired or something, And so it was like, so much for our TV career. But my previous casting director from Open House, Liz Jareski, said, you know what, why don't we go back to Between Us? At the end of the day, it was 4 people in 2 rooms. How hard could it be? Let's, we know how to make these micro-budget movies. Let's do that. So she put in a little bit of money now and came on as a producer. We raised some money on Facebook. Then this is early years of Kickstarter, and we did a Kickstarter campaign. And that was enough to, so by the time we had around $40,000 or so, $45, something, or in that range, that was enough to set a start date. I knew we could always make something at that level. And so we went back to the agents and managers that we were casting with originally and said, okay, well, the script hasn't changed. We never rewrote the script to be a lower budget. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. And the parts are the same. So if you liked it before and your actors liked it before, they're going to like it now. We're just not paying them, really. We'll pay them $100 a day. And we had enough to afford that. We didn't have enough to pay the crew. We had enough to feed the actors, as long as they didn't have peanut allergies, because then we couldn't give them peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So that's always the first question to ask.
Or gluten.
Yeah, or gluten. Yeah, no, that would have tanked. But thankfully, actors don't eat. I mean, it's axiomatic in this town. Like, actors, they don't eat carbs at all, and I don't think they eat anything. I don't know how it works with them. So, feeding them is actually fairly easy. But but yeah, we. And then we were able to find a crew that was willing to work for free. We said, look, we're going to keep raising money, and we were raising money, and until we didn't need to. But if you want to work on this movie, don't expect to get paid. If it happens, great, but don't expect it. And luckily in LA, you can find enough really good crew people that will work on a movie like this. So we had an amazing cinematographer, Nancy Schreiber, who I'd met at Slamdance, who's an ASC cinematographer. She's only, I think, like the 3rd woman that was ever in the ASC, and she was a DP on Visions of Light, which is this great documentary about cinematographers. Anyway, she's an award-winning filmmaker. And so she came on board, and she was teaching a class at AFI, so she brought in a lot of her students who worked on it, and a lot of people just wanted to work with her, and people knew me through Slamdance. They saw the actors, and like, oh, okay, this is something to jump in on. Anyway, and in the end, we did find an investor that came in for, roughly 2/3 of the budget. And his check only cleared the third to the last day of shooting. But that was enough time to pay the crew, or at least some of the crew. I still haven't gotten paid. Some other people have. And, and we finished, and it was enough to finish the film.
So it sounds like there was an initial $25,000 put up, then you raised some money on Facebook and then Kickstarter, and then...
Well, that first 25,000, it wasn't even that much. I think it was 20 in the end. It came from a couple individual people, Liz, and then two people that were friends on Facebook, but one of them was someone I knew from high school. I hadn't talked to her in 20 years at least, well, a lot more than that. And another was another indie filmmaker. I had no idea he had money, and would give it to me. So, it's just, and I was like, oh, this kind of crowdsourcing is working nicely. So, and then Kickstarter was happening, and a friend of mine had done the Kickstarter, and he said, yeah, you can raise a good 10 grand or so on there.
And this was back in 2010, you said, that you did the Kickstarter campaign?
About that, yeah, 2010, fall of 2010. We did that. So it was way before the whole Veronica Braff, raise $2 million because you've got a movie star. Oh, how hard could it be? It's like, no, $10,000 was a doable goal and, achievable. Hard work to get it. It's not easy. But, we did it. We did some unique things with it in how we promoted it. But also I put our business plan, I embedded it as a PDF onto the Kickstarter page, kind of as almost a Trojan horse. So people wanted to give substantially more money, but do it as an investment. They could find the PDF. So what happened was that even though we only raised about $10,000 on Kickstarter per se, it led to us getting another 20 or 25,000 kind of ultimately beyond Kickstarter. But more importantly, I always tell people Kickstarter, it's called Kickstarter, it's not called Kick Finisher. It's really there to get the ball rolling, and then how you take it from there is up to you. But I think the most important person of all the 84 backers that that we found on Kickstarter, the most important person to convince is yourself, because it forces you to, this whole process forced me to do a business plan, to do a pitch video, and the hardest person to convince to make a movie is always yourself. Everyone else, they'll believe you, but you know better, especially after it's your third or fourth film.
Did you have a plan B or C or D if that money didn't come in?
Probably I always have plan B, C, D, and E, usually an F or G along the way. Yeah, no, definitely. And there were all kinds of odd people that wanted to give us money that we didn't take because there were too many strings attached and Russian mafia girlfriends involved and, all kinds of weird things. But, at some point you take it, So, in the end, we were very lucky. Like, all the money came with, I have wonderful investors, and they've all been incredibly supportive. So.
Let's say, though, you'd like to go the route of pitching a network or an individual that would like to invest in a film.
Mm-hmm.
What do you need to have in place when you show up? I know something like that, they're going to want to see complete organization and...
Right. In my experience, they want to see a written pitch, but they don't want it to be 40 pages. They want it to be between 5 and 10 pages, that they can get the idea of your film that quickly. And nowadays, if you can put any kind of pitch reel together, sizzle reel, kind of trailer, I know you haven't shot it yet supposedly, but maybe you can, for free on your own dime, you can go down to your subject and get an afternoon with them and get them on tape. And if you shoot it with your HDSLR and you cut it on your cloud editing system, you put it together for very little, and you have their stills which you can license, and so you put together a little 2-minute pitch movie along with a 5-page pitch. That's all you need. They're going to get it from that. So at least come in with those two things, and you have a shot.
The first thing that I did was go to a friend of mine named Michael Green, who had been the head of NARIS. That's the group that gives out the Grammy Awards. And I had known Michael for about 15 years. And I called him up and said, I have a project that I think you might be interested in. So he said, well, what is it? So I told him briefly on the phone. He said, well, what have you got on it? I said, well, right now all I have is a bunch of pictures and some stories. So I had photographs. I made a book, like you know, a folder that had a lot of the photographs of the women in it, and I wrote up the stories of each of them that I had done after this year of research. And I went up to see Michael and gave him the book. And he said, yeah, this looks interesting. What do you want? And I said, I want enough money to make a demo reel. And he said, okay, I'll give you the money. So we did. We went out and we shot our first interviews, and we did a 7-minute demo reel. And with that demo reel, we then went out to major funders and started asking for money for the project. So that was our first steps.
So you made all of your money back on your first independent film, A Car Decision, which is something we rarely hear of people doing. First off, where did you meet those investors? Where did you obtain them? And then what was the process like?
Okay. Well, the investors actually already knew me. So being, you know, you want to first of all approach people that you know. In my situation, having, you know, being an established professional, I was in contact with other professionals. And it's interesting, in the United States, there's a lot of non-traditional investors that are very much interested in Hollywood. You know, and you'd really be surprised. And it's not here in California. You can go anywhere. You can go to like Las Vegas, for instance, or New York, or anywhere in the country. And people are very much enthralled with Hollywood, and they like to be involved, whether it's, you know, behind the scenes or not. So you want to go to people you know, and, you know, you have to have a background when you're approaching individuals who are going to invest in a project. So it's like anything. It's like being I guess it's like being a broker, and you're approaching someone and saying, hey, I got this great portfolio of stocks, and I want you to invest in it because I can make you a return. So a lot of this plays on the credibility of the individual who's selling the project, and I was selling the project fundamentally. And with these people, I was very credible. I was extremely professional. They knew exactly what I was about, and they knew my MO. They knew that I'm not someone who's going to be frivolous with funds, but I have a very specific vision for a project and a plan on how to get them their a return on their investment. So that's the approach I took, which is probably going to be a little bit different, I think, than some of the people who are locally trying to make films. I guess what I would say is really use your own network first. Try and exhaust that before going to the traditional sources, like, you know, going downtown and finding a production house or pitching your script at the AFM.
What types of materials did you present these investors with? Like, let's say, you know, you were a broker and you were going to show them your quarterly reports or something. What did you show them to make them, besides them knowing you personally and you know, having an existing relationship?
Well, you have to show them, well, first of all, the big thing is how much money do you already have in the film? So for me, you know, I had invested 20% of the film already, so I already had a certain amount of, as I said before, skin in the game. That's huge. That's really important, because a lot of times you hear about people getting money from investors and just being very frivolous with it. And I'm talking on all levels. I'm talking about directors, producers, actors, you know, and so forth. It's really easy to be frivolous with other people's money, and that's just not professional, and it's not the way to conduct yourself. So they already knew how much of investment I was making in it, which is 20%, and I'm looking for the rest of the 80%. So a lot of this is dependent on how much faith they have in you as a person who's going to be able to deliver on a promise. So a lot of it does go back to personality and having a record of being an upright individual. So that's a big part of it. Then the second part of it is, what's the strategy? So what's the audience that you're trying to target? So in my case, Alvarez Decision was made for a foreign audience. And what I did was I did research on theatrical sales in India, where I wanted to release this film. And I gave them the numbers. I said, look, if we invest this much, it's a safe bet that we can get a return on our investment, if as long as we don't go over this amount of money. And if we can get a theatrical release in India, which we did, it was a national release, we should be able to make the money back as long as we're really smart on the flip side of it, making sure that the distributors are actually giving us, you know, our fair share.
We just did our best to try and educate ourselves. Eventually, we went and met one of the directors that I worked with on Band of Brothers and The Mentalist, David Nutter, and he gave us some great advice. Brian had great editing skills, and he told Brian that Brian should edit a sizzle trailer of his film from clips of other movies. So he should take clips of other movies that are thematic to what he wants Mission Park to be. And fortunately for Brian, all the actors who were attached to the project, Fernanda, Walter, Jeremy, and myself, had work that he could, you know, extract scenes from. So he pieced this amazing trailer with us in it, and it looks like the film. It was brilliant. Finally, he saw, or Armando saw that Brian was really putting in the effort to get this project made. And I met with Armando finally, so I think he was like, wow, this project and these guys are really serious. So he read the script finally, I think after 2 years of Brian trying to get him to read the script. I only took 1 year. Armando took 2 years to read the script. And he loved it. And I think after that, Brian showed him the trailer that he had made that David Nutter recommended he make. And Armando thought that we had made the film already. And he felt like, what? I missed the boat on this one? And he hadn't. Brian was just very clever at making the trailer. And that sort of is what kickstarted Armando into joining the team. And he's been an amazing supporter. I mean, he's our sole investor, one man. And we always believed that one person would come and believe in this project the way we did, and that was Armando.
Tell me about the fundraisers. I'm curious about that because you also used Indiegogo, but what were some of the fundraisers about?
Well, we did a lot of online outreach fundraising where we would just write a really compassionate fundraising letter and send it to key people and ask them who they would suggest we send it to. And through that, we started increasing our fan base and our funding base. And, you know, I would send it to a friend in San Francisco, who would send it to a friend of hers in San Francisco, who sent it to a friend of his in San Diego, who turned out to be an heiress who came through with a large chunk of money. So that was kind of the net that we were weaving to pull the money in. And then we actually did a major fundraising up at the Playboy Mansion, which Hugh Hefner, who is one of our producers, threw for us. So that was very helpful.
So some of it was sort of 6 degrees of separation, people who knew someone.
Exactly, exactly.
Judy, you've referenced beating down doors, knocking down doors a few times. What does that entail, and how can one do it graciously? Or maybe not so graciously?
I think you have to have a lot of patience. And you have to know that it's not one phone call, that it's many phone calls that you'll be making, that you'll come back to the same people over and over and over again. It's a matter of getting people comfortable with you, of getting them on your side. So instead of thinking that you're going out to raise money, you have to think that you're going out to woo people, to bring them into your camp, to make them part of your support system, to just get their enthusiasm for your project. And, you know, if the money isn't forthcoming immediately, that doesn't mean it's not going to come in the long run. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to help you in some other way. So I think it's almost like gathering your tribe around your project, getting people who see your passion and believe in you. So I think that's the attitude you have to go in with. So
when is no really a no? sometimes I think people say, well, they don't take no for an answer, but I think sometimes the person might be saying no not to be malicious, but maybe just they truly can't give whatever it is that you are asking for. And how do you still interact with that person after that?
I think that you have to have a real sense of where people are coming from, of what's going on with them that makes this possible for them or not. And you have to live within the reality of that. And maybe a no is a no now, but is not a no in the future. And then, you know, there's some people who say, take me off your list. Well, if they say that, then it's a no. You say, okay, we're sorry we bothered you. And, you know, you have to do that too, because you will be bothering a lot of people who don't want to be bothered about this, who have their own problems or their own projects that they're raising money for. So you just have to be very sensitive every step of the way.
What if you have a filmmaking friend that says, you know what, my husband's mother-in-law is going to give us X amount of dollars? What's that conversation you would have? Is that right? Husband's mother-in-law? Yeah.
Someone you're not related to has access to...
Or a friend. Friend from college, did really well, got out before the whole .com crash, lives on an island, decides, you know what, I want to invest in indie film. I want to, not invest, but I want to help you make
I want to
film.
put money in indie movies.
Right. What's that talk you would have them have with that friend? A realistic
honestly,
talk.
it depends on the person you're talking to and what their friend sounds like. I've had conversations where someone goes, oh, I have someone who wants to put money in movies, but they're pro-NRA, very political. So you have to make sure there's guns in the film in some positive way. That's sort of the Ed Wood conversation, you know. It's like, oh, the film was going to end with a big explosion, but the film ends with this. Not anymore. Also, I got a nephew, not a bright boy, but something tells me he'd be a hell of a... You have these constraints on it. Sort of the best way to preface the conversation, I think, is if someone knows someone who has access to money or knows people who have access to money, is to say to that person, okay, here's what I need. I need this much money. Here's the investment agreement or whatever it is. And you have these people. If you can get these people to come in and sign the line which is dotted and make this film a go film, I'll give you 10% of the budget as your fee, and I'll make you an executive producer. You'll be an executive producer, and when the cash hits our account and clears, the first check is going to be to you. So if we're raising $200,000, the first check is going to be to you for $20,000 for finding the money. And that's a good way of approaching it, because a lot of these deals are done through social means. I mean, film is not a smart financial investment. There's not a lot of return. You don't do it because it's going to make money. You do it because it's fun, because it's cool. You do it because you like movies. You do it because you like the people involved. You believe in the dream. You do it because you know that if no one had invested in Darren Aronofsky or Quentin Tarantino in the beginning, we wouldn't have Black Swan or Pulp Fiction. You do it for those reasons. So if you take it involves being that politician again, and taking someone to dinner and buying them drinks and saying the right things and making sure you're fit. And I think there's only so much of a show you want to put on and so many compromises you want to make before it's silly. But if you have a buffer, someone who knows that person and gets along with them already, they're friends, having them have an incentive to get the deal done, to maybe take that dinner, one with you, one without you, and sort of be the social buffer and stay in the situation and help work it out, it's not a bad way to go. And it's not dishonest because, you know, it is, you're being honest about what you want. We want this money. But this person's involved in the process and they can make a little coin off of it. It's not a bad way to go.
What was the distribution path with Weather Girl?
Well, Weather Girl, we premiered at Slam Dance. We were one of their, they had special screenings where you don't have to be a first-time filmmaker, so I was able to do that, and it was great. We went out to Park City and we kind of used the platform of Sundance to get attention and brought out some of the talent. Like you mentioned, like, you know, there's a great is a great cast in Weather Girl. Mark Harmon was supportive of the movie. Caitlin Olsen from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and then Patrick J. Adams, who is on Suits now, the USA show, and also is one of the stars of 6 Month Rule, and Ryan Devlin. Anyways, and Trish O'Kelly. They're a great cast, and they're all really supportive of the movie. The movie was so small, and everybody did it for $200 a day, and then they followed through in supporting it all the way to the end, which I think is so important when it comes to getting a deal for your movie, because it's not just business, it's the movie business, and people, you know, want to see the stars. They want to meet the cast, and you know, if Mark Harmon is backing it, it must be good, you know. So, anyways, that happened. We sold television rights at Park City, and then we wanted a theatrical release because we didn't make it specifically to be a television movie. So we did some maneuvering and basically were able to get a 6-month window to do a theatrical. So we took some of the money from the television deal and we siphoned it into our own theatrical release and did about 10 cities, and you know, it was great. It was great. And then we came out on TV and DVD and all that jazz, and it was awesome because the movie didn't cost very much money, and we made back a huge bulk of it. You know, like 90%, I think, is all made back in the first couple of months, which was awesome for me because then I could turn around and say, here's my next movie, and my last movie made its money back. So what do you think? And so there was a big process of going out and raising money for 6 Month Rule based on this same model, and yeah, and it worked out. So I consider myself very lucky that anytime anybody gives you money to make a movie, I mean, you should just thank your lucky stars, because it's the greatest job in the world, and it's such a commitment of faith, you know, in a filmmaker to be like, here you go, here's a bunch of money, make it into a piece of art, you know, and it's like, okay,